During the Second World War, the Royal Navy built two of the strangest ships of the conflict. They were not fast, they were not graceful, they were not even proper warships in the traditional sense. Instead, they were broad, slow, and mounted only a single turret. Yet that turret held some of the most powerful naval guns Britain had ever made, the mighty 15-inch guns once fitted to First World War battleships. These vessels became known as the Roberts-class monitors, HMS Roberts and HMS Abercrombie. They were not meant to hunt cruisers or trade broadsides with enemy battleships. Their mission was different. They were to serve as floating gun platforms, creeping close to enemy shores, and smashing defenses with overwhelming firepower. To many sailors, they looked old-fashioned, even ungainly. But in the brutal business of amphibious warfare, they earned their place. The very idea of a monitor went back to the American Civil War, when the Union Navy launched the famous USS Monitor in 1862. The British later borrowed the term for their own shallow-draught, heavy-gun vessels. Heavy ships like dreadnoughts could not risk the shallow coastal waters, but the Army needed big guns firing inland. They had a broad, flat hull, just enough engine power to move into position, and a massive gun turret bolted on top. The first generation of British monitors were crude but effective. They fired their shells into enemy trenches, rail lines, and coastal forts. When the war ended, most were scrapped. But the great 15-inch turrets that armed them were too valuable to throw away. The Royal Navy stored them, not knowing that 20 years later they would be called back into service. By 1940, Britain once again faced the prospect of large-scale amphibious operations. To support invasions, planners wanted ships capable of sustained bombardment against coastal defenses. Battleships were powerful but too valuable to risk in close waters filled with mines, submarines, and air attack. In storage sat two spare 15-inch turrets. One had served on the First World War monitor Marshal Salt. The other had been built as a reserve during that earlier conflict but never used. Rather than let these guns rust, the Admiralty decided to build new ships around them. The result was the Roberts-class HMS Roberts, laid down in 1940 and launched in 1941, and HMS Abercrombie, laid down in 1941 and launched in 1942. Each was little more than a hull carrying a single massive turret forward, backed by 4-inch secondary guns and layers of anti-aircraft defenses. The Roberts class were instantly recognizable. Their hulls were squat and broad, with deep bulges running along the sides. These bulges acted as extra flotation and armor, absorbing the blast from mines or torpedoes. Their shallow draft allowed them to operate close to beaches where other warships dared not go. Speed was never a goal. At full power, Roberts and Abercrombie could manage only 12 knots. But they did not need to chase an enemy. Their job was to arrive, anchor, and provide accurate gunfire for as long as necessary. Each ship carried a crew of around 350 men. Living conditions were hard, but the men took pride in serving on ships that, while odd-looking, could unleash devastation with every broadside. The first of the class, HMS Roberts, commissioned in 1941. After trials and working up, she sailed to the Mediterranean in time for Operation Torch, the Allied landings in North Africa in November 1942. Off Casablanca, Roberts opened fire on Vichy French shore batteries. Her 15-inch shells smashed gun emplacements and silenced resistance that could have delayed the landings. To the troops struggling ashore, her guns offered reassurance that the Royal Navy was there, blasting a path inland. It was the classic role of a monitor: sit offshore, endure enemy fire, and keep pounding until the defenders were overwhelmed. In 1943, Roberts was joined by her sister ship, HMS Abercrombie. She carried the second great turret and was almost identical in layout. Her first taste of combat came during Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. As troops landed on the beaches, Abercrombie hurled her 15-inch shells against Italian gun positions. The explosions carved deep craters and dislodged enemy artillery, giving the infantry room to move inland. Though she never drew as much attention as battleships or carriers, Abercrombie proved the usefulness of a dedicated bombardment ship. 2 months later, Abercrombie was called to support another landing, Operation Avalanche, at Salerno in September 1943. This time, disaster struck. While operating close inshore, she struck a mine. Before damage control parties could respond, she hit a second mine. The double blast ripped open her hull and caused serious flooding. For a moment, her loss seemed certain. But the great bulges along her sides absorbed much of the damage. Slowly, painfully, she limped back to port. Abercrombie had survived, but she was crippled. Repairs took almost a year, which meant she would miss the most famous amphibious assault of the war, D-Day in Normandy. While Abercrombie lay in dock, HMS Roberts carried the banner of her class. On June 6, 1944, she took her place among the vast Allied armada off the coast of France. From her position offshore, Roberts fired salvo after salvo at German gun batteries. Her 15-inch shells tore into bunkers, strongpoints, and artillery positions that threatened the landings. Each shot was guided by spotters on shore or aircraft overhead, calling corrections back to the ship. Roberts fired for days, her gunners exhausted, her decks covered in spent shell cases. She was slow, she was ugly, but in that moment she was indispensable. By the summer of 1944, Abercrombie had returned to service. Though she had missed Normandy, she was soon back in action for Operation Dragoon, the Allied landings in southern France in August. Again her role was the same, stand off the coast and use her massive guns to suppress enemy batteries. Later she shifted to the eastern Mediterranean, supporting operations in the Aegean and providing cover for landings in Greece. Despite her near loss at Salerno, she ended the war as a proven bombardment ship. For Roberts, the last great test came in November 1944 at Walcheren Island in the Netherlands. German artillery on the island commanded the approaches to Antwerp, and unless they were silenced, the Allies could not use the port. Roberts joined other monitors in a ferocious bombardment. Her shells ripped into coastal gun positions and even broke open dikes, flooding sections of the island. The destruction was immense, but necessary. Without Antwerp, Allied supply lines would have stretched too thin. The capture of Walcheren ensured the port could be used, and Roberts had played her part. With the war over, both ships were quickly retired. Once the invasions ended, their role faded. HMS Abercrombie was decommissioned and scrapped in 1954. HMS Roberts lingered longer, serving as a training and accommodation ship. She was finally broken up in 1965. They were the last monitors Britain would ever build. The Roberts class may have been the last of their kind, but in the crucible of the Second World War, they earned their place in naval history. From the gun decks to the bridge, every story we tell honors those who served. If this tale made you feel the salt and steel of history, give it a like, and if you're not yet part of our channel's convoy, subscribe and join the ranks. More powerful stories await.